Hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Thanks for joining us. I'm John Lannon, the CEO of Doras. Before I hand over to my colleagues, Fiona McCall and Rachel Birmingham, who do this webinar, I'll just say a few words by way of introduction. We're a human rights organization, and as such, we strive to ensure that migrants and international protection applicants, in other words, rights holders, have knowledge of their human rights. They can put this knowledge to use for self-advocacy or to campaign for change when it's needed. And our work is directly informed by the people most affected by human rights failures or affected by lack of information on the part of organizations or individuals providing supports and services. Those are duty bearers, or what are referred to as duty bearers in the human rights world. Now, in general, everyone should have access to the same supports and services, whether that's employment or social welfare, or education, healthcare, housing, or any of the other rights areas. But in some cases, there are restrictions to what people can access depending on their status in the country. Now, we campaign for change in relation to many of those restrictions, and an example of that would be the fact that the right to work wasn't available to international protection applicants for many, many years, not until a couple of years ago, in fact. It's still restricted. Not every international protection applicant is allowed to work. So one of the things that makes it difficult to realize the human rights of migrants and international protection applicants is that there's a whole range of different statuses and stamps and visas that can apply to their situation here in Ireland. So we thought we'd do this overview just to help people who are service providers or who just want to know more about this area. Now, this is our third webinar in a series of four. Our previous ones were primarily intended for specific cohorts of rights holders. We had one on family reunification. We had one on applying for citizenship by naturalization. And this one is likely to be relevant to a much broader range of people and organizations, including, I'd say, employers. So we are recording the presentation, and we're going to make it available on our website. So I'll hand over now to Fiona. She and Rachel will work through a presentation, probably take about 20 minutes or so, and we'll take questions after that. But as questions come to mind as they're going through the presentation, just pop them into the Q&A or into the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them after the presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Fiona.
Many thanks, John. And thanks to everyone who's taken the time to join us this evening for this webinar on immigration status and stamps. I firstly want to say a few words about Doras. We were established in the year 2000 to provide support specifically to asylum seekers living in direct provision in our area, and our office is based in Limerick City. Our vision is a society where equality and respect for the human rights of all people are realised. And our mission is to achieve this through personal and collaborative advocacy, the law, through intercultural dialogue, support, inclusion, and empowerment, working at local, national, and international levels. So this evening, we'll be focusing on three main areas regarding general immigration in Ireland. Firstly, we will give an introduction to the immigration system as a whole. Then we will focus on seeking international protection in Ireland, looking at what seeking international protection actually means and who can apply. We'll then move on to explaining the different residency stamps that can be applied for and how you go about applying for them. We'll then give a bit of information regarding other useful resources with regards to immigration stamps. And we'll also at the end give any kind of COVID updates that we have available to us. And then, as John said, we'll give a bit of time at the end for any questions that you might have. So, starting with the introduction to the immigration system. Immigration in Ireland is dealt with under the Department of Justice at what is known as the Immigration Service Delivery Department. Mouthful. It's referred to as the ISD. The Garda National Immigration Bureau, referred to as the GNIB, registers immigration permissions for those living outside of Dublin, whilst the ISD registers permissions for those living in Dublin. And this is done at their offices in Bird Key. Excuse me. The Department of Foreign Affairs deals with any applications for passports, as well as printing Irish travel documents. And then finally, the Border Management Unit deals with customs and immigrations at any ports of entry, for example, the Dublin Airport. So with regards to visas, non-visa required nationals can enter Ireland up to 90 days visa-free. However, visa required nationals must apply and be granted a visa before entering Ireland. The list of visa required nationals, which is subject to change and has been changing quite frequently recently due to COVID. This can be found on the immigration website, which we will give at the end of the presentation. It's also important to note that EU nationals don't need a visa at all to travel to the country, enter or reside in the state. So there are various different permissions that can be granted based upon the reason for staying in Ireland, say over 90 days. Once you're granted permission, you must attend your local immigration office to have your passport stamped if it is your first registration, and to apply and pay for your Irish residence permit. It is important to note that children under 16 years of age are not required to register or apply for an Irish residence permit. And as from December 2020, there is no longer the requirement to have your passport stamped if you are renewing your permission. So now we will take a look at the international protection system itself and ask, what does it mean to seek international protection? So seeking international protection, also referred to as seeking asylum, is the act of asking the state for protection. And you're asking the state for protection from your country of origin. Those who seek protection are those who are unable to return to their country of origin because they have a fear for their lives or fear of persecution if they return. International protection applicants are often forced to flee from their country of origin because of these fears of persecution. Now, who can apply for international protection in Ireland? Anyone. Anyone can apply for IP in Ireland, no matter how long they've stayed in Ireland or how they entered the state. So all asylum seekers, if they want to apply for protection in Ireland, must physically present themselves to the International Protection Office, also known as IPO, which is in Dublin, and the address is on this slide here, 79 to 83 Lower Mount Street. The applicant will be asked for their reasons or grounds on which they are seeking asylum, and this will be ascertained in a short initial interview. They'll also be asked to have their fingerprints taken to be cross-referenced with the Eurodac system. You'll also be given information on how to apply for legal representation, state-aided legal representation, which is free via the Legal Aid Board, which is known as the Refugee Legal Service. You'll also be given an offer of accommodation within the direct provision system. During this initial stage, you will also have your photograph taken in order to be issued with a temporary residence certificate, a TRC. And this card is also referred to as the blue card, and it basically confirms that you are seeking international protection or asylum in the state. So once you've been accepted into the asylum system, you'll then be sent an international protection application questionnaire. In the questionnaire, you'll need to set out your reasons for seeking asylum, and you'll need to submit any relevant supporting documentation that you may have. The questionnaire can be completed in either English or in the applicant's own language. It is important to stress that you should seek legal assistance when completing the questionnaire, as this will form the basis of your claim to protection. After the applicant completes and submits the questionnaire to the IPO, you'll be called for an interview, also known as the second interview, and your legal representative should help you prepare for this interview, and you can also opt for an interpreter if you have no English or your English is weak if required. So we'll now take a brief look at the differing protection statuses that can be granted or given or declared. So refugee status. Refugees are people who are outside their home country, whose life and or human rights are seriously at risk because of who they are or what they believe. Their governments cannot or will not protect them, which creates a well-founded fear for their safety if returned to that country. And as you see here, we have the 1951 Convention on Refugees, also referred to as the Geneva Convention, that gives definition of refugee as a person who has a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside his or her country of nationality, and is unable to, or owing to such a fear, is unwilling to avail him or herself of the protection of that country of origin. So subsidiary protection is another protection status that may be granted. This is an EU level protection that's recognized within the EU. Those granted subsidiary protection have a fear of serious harm from the death penalty or execution or torture or inhuman or degrading treatment. They can also fear punishment as a person in his/her country of origin, or fear serious and individual threat to their life or person by reason of indiscriminate violence in a situation of either international or internal armed conflict. So now we will look at what it means to be granted permission to remain. This isn't a protection status, this is a residency status. So if you refuse both refugee status and subsidiary protection, the minister will look at an application for permission to remain in the state. The Ministerial Decisions Unit will decide if there are reasons for granting a permission to remain by considering your family and personal circumstances, as well as things like the right to respect for your personal, private, and family life. The minister will also consider the nature of your connection to the state, other humanitarian considerations, such as illness, special needs, other extenuating circumstances, as well as your character and conduct. Also, considerations of national security and public order, and any other considerations of common good will also be taken into account at this stage. So after the interview, the applicant will receive a formal notice in writing of the recommendation from the International Protection Office. And this can take some time, unfortunately, more than the 9 months that the government has committed to, and take usually 18 months plus. You will then receive a final decision issued in writing from the Ministerial Decisions Unit. However, if you receive a negative decision for your protection status from the International Protection Office, you have the right to appeal. And you can appeal this decision to the International Protection Appeals Tribunal, also known as IPAT. Unfortunately, however, if all applications and appeals are refused, the applicant will be issued with notification of a deportation order. So I think that's probably enough from me thus far. So I'm going to hand over to you, Rachel, to focus on the next few slides on specific immigration stamps and differing permissions that may be applied for, as well as the entitlements that come with them. We'll also look at further information sources and the COVID updates. Excuse me. So over to you, Rachel. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fiona. As Fiona stated at the beginning, the international protection system is slightly different than the system for the rest of the stamps, just to make it that bit more confusing for everyone. So I'm going to go through, I'll try and be quick, but not too quick, because it is a lot of information to take in, but the different immigration stamps, their entitlements, and a bit about how you can apply for them, because there are different pathways. So there are several different stamps for those who wish to reside in Ireland based on their individual circumstances, and each immigration permission will be issued a corresponding stamp number. So the refugee status, subsidiary protection, and permission to remain that Fiona was speaking about, they, for example, will be granted what is a number 4, so a stamp 4. Immigration permissions are usually applied for directly to Immigration Service Delivery, that ISD that we spoke about. However, there are some instances where the local GNIB office may be able to grant permissions. But again, it's very nuanced, so we'll keep those questions for the end. I'll leave this slide up for a bit. And as we said, we are going to have this translated and recorded and put onto our website. So there's no need to go through all of this in detail at the moment. But this is just a list of all the different possible stamps and what they mean. So as you can see, there's quite a number, and I'll try and go through them in as much detail as I can. The first one is what is called a stamp 1, and this is for work permits. These are given to people who have received an employment permit, a business permission, or a working holiday authorization. You might have heard them referred to as either a critical skills work permit or a general work permit. It's a permission that's tied to your employment. So unfortunately, if you're on a work permit and your employment ceases, your permission to be in the state will also cease, and you'll have to either get a new work permit or a different permission if you wish to stay in Ireland. Those on stamp 1 are not entitled to social welfare payments or medical cards. They're dealt with by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. So again, this is another confusion. They're not actually dealt with by ISD or GNIB. It's applied for directly to the Department of, I'll just say ETE for ease there. They do have specific income and job requirements, and that's important to note. Most of them, there are several exceptions, but most of them will require an income of at least 30,000 euro. So if you are looking at applying for a work permit, it's important to check that website from the Department of ETE, because it will have a list which sets out which jobs are actually qualified for a work permit. You may be able to apply for family to join you in the state. Again, this is based on how much time you've been here, which specific work permit you're on, your income threshold, etc. So if you're looking for your family to join you, it's best to get some legal advice on that. And they are reckonable for citizenship. The next stamps I'm going to talk about are those which are student permissions. And again, there's quite a range here of different student permissions. The first one, stamp 1A, is specifically and only for those on an accountancy training program. So this is another one which is tied to your employment. So if you came out from an Irish university with an accountancy degree, you could apply for the stamp 1A if you are going into a specific employment accountancy training program. I know that's really a very specific stamp, but it does exist. And again, you cannot access any social welfare payments while on that stamp. And once that stamp has expired, in most instances, you probably will be offered a general work permit with the firm after that's done, but it's for a very limited specific period of time. Stamp 1G is again for those who have finished studies in Ireland, and they're looking for permission to look for employment, and it's called the third level graduate scheme. So you can access employment, and it's important to note here, without restrictions. So there's no restriction on the number of hours or the sector of employment here for up to 2 years, depending on your education level. And that's whether you have a level 8, 9, 10, etc. degree. And again, unfortunately, cannot access social welfare payments. Stamp 2 is the broadest of the student permissions, and that is basically for any student who is here attending a recognized full-time course for at least 1 year. And they are permitted to work for 20 hours during term time. So that's when you're actually in your classes full-time, only 20 hours per week. And you can see the dates there. June, July, August, September, and then December 15th to January 15th inclusive, you may work full-time 40 hours per week. And again, a bit of a broken record here, but cannot access social welfare payments. And stamp 2A is for students attending a course not recognized by the Department of Education and Skills. So they're not permitted to work. This is generally, I would say, mostly for study abroad semester students. They're only here for a very short time, 3-4 months maximum. It's literally just for them to study, and that's it. Stamp 3, dependent family member. This is a bit of a complex stamp, to be honest. It includes visitors, retired people of independent means, ministers of religion, members of religious orders, spouses, civil partners, and dependents of some stamp 4 holders. Most people that we would see, that we would work with in Doras, would be on stamp 3 if they've joined a spouse or a civil partner who is on a stamp 4. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a change there a few years ago, and they are putting most people who come through a joint family visa to a stamp 4 holder already residing in Ireland onto a stamp 3. And unfortunately, that means you're not permitted to work. You're not entitled to social welfare payments. One of the only good things is that it is reckonable for citizenship. But besides that, it is a very, very limited stamp. There is a campaign to change and reform stamp 3. Some of you might have seen that already. And we would be, broadly supportive of that, because this is a very restrictive stamp for people to be on, and you don't have a lot of rights. And stamp 4, this is kind of, I guess, the catch-all permission, as you can see. It encompasses there spouses and civil partners of Irish nationals, convention and programme refugees, which we spoke about already, subsidiary protection, permission, humanitarian leave to remain, family reunification, parents of Irish citizen children, independent status or domestic violence victims, and dependent children of Irish citizens. There are a few more, but I didn't want to list every single possible stamp 4. We could be here all night. So stamp 4 can access employment without a work permit. So the ones that we mentioned there at the beginning, the work permits, that is tied to your employment. When you're on a stamp 4, your employment doesn't matter. You can work anywhere, as many hours as you want. If you lose the job, you can just find another one. That's no hassle. You can apply for social welfare payments if needed, HAP, medical cards, etc. Reckonable for citizenship. So any time that you spend on stamp 4 will be counted towards the time for you to apply for Irish citizenship. You're entitled to apply for SUSI and other schemes, depending on which specific stamp 4 you are on. And I just want to make note of that, because it is an issue for some people when they go to apply for SUSI. Unfortunately, the Department of Education has restrictions on your stamp 4 and where your permission emanates from. And when I say that, I mean if you are a spouse of Irish national versus dependent child of an Irish national, those sort of things. So depending on how you got your stamp 4, you may or may not be entitled to these schemes. The same for the bottom there. You may be able to apply for family members to join you, but this is again subject to income requirements, how long you've been in the state, and your relationship to the person that you're applying for. Lastly, we have kind of the lesser used stamps, I'll say. Stamp 0 is for people who are permitted to remain for a very specific temporary and limited purpose. So, for example, a visiting academic. It's also for elderly retired people who will be living here independently. And I just want to note that the income threshold for this is quite high. I believe it's around 60,000 euro per year. So this is, for quite wealthy people who would like to come and essentially retire in Ireland. You're not allowed to work. You cannot access social welfare, and you must have private medical insurance. So it's a very limited stamp. Not too many people are on it. Stamp 5, again, is a tricky one we don't see too much of. It's called without condition as to time, or WCATT for short. And this is a stamp that can be applied for by those who already have a stamp 4. And it just allows for you to have residency continuously without having to renew your stamp. So it might be good for someone, say, who, if dual nationality is not something that they would like to have, or maybe they can't have, they can't actually apply for Irish citizenship, they might apply for stamp 5 just for ease of not having to renew every 2-3 years, etc. And finally, the last one there, stamp 6, is for those who are Irish citizens with dual citizenship. Some states require a stamp in their national passport for dual citizens. Again, it's not one that's kind of widely used. This as we see here, is the lovely IRP card. Some of you might have heard of it referred to as the GNIB card. They're in the process of switching everything, so it can make it a bit confusing for some people. I'll just go through kind of all the different sections if everyone can see my mouse here. So this would be the name, very creative name they've had on this, John Smith. Valid until, the date that it's valid until, date and place of issue. So that will be if, say you're in Limerick, it will say Henry Street, Limerick, and the date that you were there. Your type of permit, your stamp number. And here, under remarks, it kind of gives you if you have specific restrictions or entitlements on your stamp. So this one here, stamp 1G, they have the permission to work. If you were to look at one, say that was the stamp 2A, the student stamp that I talked about earlier, it would say here, you know, does not have permission to work. So there might be a few different remarks here on the card. Let me just go in there now to renewals. So depending on your immigration permission, you may renew directly at local GNIB office or in Burgkey in Dublin, or you might have to write into ISD for a permission letter. So if you do already have a permission letter, it will state how to renew the permission, usually at the back of the letter, kind of the last page. It will give you a paragraph that states whether you need to write to ISD to renew your permission, or you can attend local immigration, and it will say that on there. If there's any confusion and you're not sure, you know, how to renew or what your permission means, you can always get in touch with ISD or your local GNIB office, and they can usually tell you what you need to do in order to renew. Renewals can be granted from anywhere from 6 months to 5 years, depending on your permission. Again, usually this is stipulated in your letter if you have one, and other permissions that might not have letters each time you renew. It's generally speaking 1 year or 3 years that you would get for a renewal. And finally, from December 2020, Fiona mentioned this already, renewals do not need to get their passports stamped unless you have a brand new passport, then you will have to bring that in. But this is just kind of leading on from difficulties with COVID. They have kind of changed their policy on this, which is good to see. I've got a few different, sorry, excuse me, my computer is frozen there. There's a few different websites here. So the Immigration Service Delivery, that is inis.gov.ie. Inis is their old name. They are hopefully the end of this month promising to have a brand new website, which should make things a lot easier for people to access information, to go through and see, you know, visa requirements, updates, looking for forms and applications. So really excited to see that coming up. IPO, the International Protection Office website, Department of Foreign Affairs, you can apply for passports online now and for renewals. So that's their website there. And the bottom one is Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. And again, that's where you can get information on work permits specifically. So I'll just leave that up there for a minute for people. Again, we'll have this on the website, so don't feel like you have to be jotting it all down at the moment. And lastly, good old COVID-19 updates. Hopefully sometime soon, we won't have to be talking about this. But just to note that local GNIB offices are operating by appointment only. And I have the Limerick email there for the Limerick office. There was at one point in time a list of all the different emails for offices around the country. Unfortunately, they haven't really updated that recently. So if you're unsure, the best thing to do is to try and ring your local office and see what the procedure is to get an appointment. And Burgkey is operating as well, just for first-time registrations. All other renewals in Dublin will be online. Important to note that all permissions are currently renewed until the 20th of September 2021 automatically. So if you are kind of panicking that your stamp has expired recently, you're okay, it's good till September. But that being said, you should try and renew it now, especially as we spoke about the written renewals. They could take some time. There's a huge backlog. So do please try and renew now, even though we have until September. You have the cushion, but it is good to do it now. And that's that. As I said, it's a lot of information to be thrown at you, so please do ask questions and we'll try and answer them for you.
Okay, thanks very much, Rachel and Fiona. There was quite a lot covered there in all of that. And the terminology and the acronyms in this whole area can be quite confusing. It can be difficult to get one's head around. So that was actually just quite a quick overview of statuses. There was reference to immigration statuses, protection status, and residence statuses. But it's important to note that everything that Fiona and Rachel covered provides an individual with a legal status in Ireland, and there are rights that go with those statuses. And of course, rights holders then often need to seek clarification or further information, may need assistance with some aspect of what Rachel and Fiona covered. And this is where we come in. So we have our 24/7 helpline. We also have a centre in Limerick that people can come to or will be able to come to after the lockdown. Again, we've had to close or restrict that service because of COVID-19, but we're slowly reopening and we're available now for essential appointments. Yeah, we also, of course, then through our policy and our advocacy work, we're continuing to address gaps or restrictions that are often unfair or unreasonable. And one example of that at the moment is the fact that international protection applicants or asylum seekers are not entitled to or to get a driver's license here in Ireland, which has significant knock-on effects, you know, for the rest of us driving to and from work or whatever it is that we need to go to is a normal part of life now, but that's something that many protection applicants can't in fact do. Okay, so we're just about at the end of the hour. There was a lot covered in there and in all of that. We've put our phone number up on the screen there, two of them actually, but if you phone the mobile number 083 0802 378, you'll get through to us if you have any further questions in relation to anything that was covered today, or if you need help with your own situation, and in order to be able to you know, get what, you know, say should be in many cases straightforward, but isn't straightforward in many cases. You know, there are complexities, there are difficulties. Fiona and Rachel have been doing this for many years and sort of understand a lot of the sort of the complexities and the nuances and the issues, but I'm sure even they would acknowledge that in many days they come up against anomalies or unusual situations that haven't been experienced before. So thanks to everybody who participated this evening, either on Facebook Live or here on Zoom. We will put the recording of the presentation part up on our website and we'll circulate that on social media. Thanks to Brian, who was in the background throughout this, making sure that everything ran smoothly, and as always with these webinars. Thanks to Fiona and Rachel as well for the presentation and for answering all those questions. So we'll leave it at that for now. And as I said, if you need any help with anything else, do get in touch with us. So good night for now.